1, 2, 3, 4. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Yeah, Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. My guest today is Steve Herrman. Steve Herrman is a great trumpet player based here in Nashville, Tennessee. I met him through his connection to the Muscle Shoals Horns, and we'll learn all about that here in a minute. So welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour, Steve. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I would like to start off our conversation in the beginning of your musical life. What were some of your earliest musical memories, and how did that shape you wanting to become a musician?
Well, I actually started piano when I was 6 years old. I had two brothers who were 4 and 5 years older than me, and they started getting piano lessons, and I threw a temper tantrum because I wanted piano lessons too, and everybody thought I was too young, but actually I took right to it, and would probably still be playing piano to this day, but I had enough talent that I had a teacher that really wanted me to start doing drills and technique stuff, and I was just too immature. And so I quit, and we had a trumpet laying around the house that my brother had tried to play for a while. And I thought, just to make my parents happy, instead of just quitting, I'd say, well, I'll play trumpet, and so that was when I was 10, and 48 years later, I'm still playing trumpet.
Yeah, and you grew up in Ohio?
Yep, Hamilton, Ohio, just a little north of Cincinnati, in the southwest corner of Ohio.
So when did you realize that being a musician might actually be something you want to pursue as a career?
Well, I was always really good at playing trumpet, but I was far from any kind of prodigy, and had a pretty bad car wreck in high school, which I think really set me back because I had some damage done to my face. And so I went from being a really promising early high school player to a pretty average senior in high school, but I wanted to go into music. I'd heard Miles Davis, and I just loved those old Miles records. That was the first stuff. And then but I'd been listening to all different kinds of stuff. Listened to a lot of Chicago, back in the 70s. They were a big influence, I think, on just my trumpet sound, and lead playing and maybe even arranging. But yeah, it was. It never entered my mind. I think was the thing that I heard Miles playing that, and I went like, "Wow, that just grabbed me," And I had no idea what I was getting into. By the way, I had no idea that, what the music business really entailed and what it was going to be like to be a professional musician. I just had this dream of, becoming a jazz trumpet player.
Yeah. Did you through high school mainly play in school, or did you also join any outside band or form any band?
Me and some buddies tried to start a band, but I'm not even sure we ever played a gig. It was kind of late. I think I was a junior, but several of the older guys, they were a year older, but then they, of course, graduated and went off to college. So that was kind of the end of that band. There's a recording of that band, our one song, that my buddy Ray has, and so yeah, we were trying to do that, but mostly I was just a regular public school educated, trumpet player. And, I was taking lessons on the side, and I should also say that and I think both my junior and senior years, I was driving down to the University of Cincinnati and studying with one of the teaching assistants there. That was probably mostly just during the summers, but studied with Paul Hilner there, and he helped me quite a bit. But for when I showed up at North Texas in '78, I was way behind the guys who had really gone to arts magnet schools, and of course you're also competing against guys who had been on the road or guys who were, had already done their undergraduate work. You were auditioning against all those guys.
But it's North Texas is very much a horn player's school, so
Big band
you
mania.
don't just get there either.
Well, it's not hard to get into school. It's huge, and they pretty much taking almost anyone, especially if you were paying, an out-of-state tuition. I wasn't on a scholarship or anything, so but it was still incredibly cheap to go to school there in '78. It was cheaper for me to pay out-of-state and go to North Texas than it was to go in-state in Ohio, and certainly much cheaper than Berkeley or Miami would have been. So it was kind of a no-brainer as far as picking the school for me.
Yeah. So, what were some of your early influences on the instrument?
Well, like I said, Miles certainly grabbed me. The sound of the Chicago section. My dad even had some. I remember he had this record of the Song of the Vogel Boatman, which I think was Glenn Miller, right? And I just loved that. And Clyde McCoy's Sugar Blues. I'd gotten my first Herrman mute and tried to imitate that, and I was always really listening to all kinds of music. We were, really into, the Southern rock bands in high school. We listened to Yes, we listened to Emerson, Lake and Palmer. We were going to concerts down in Cincinnati quite a bit, seeing, our favorite groups. Saw that Peter Frampton Comes Alive tour, which I still think was kind of a really neat bit of music. Just the fact that it had so much soloing in it, on that album. It wasn't just Peter Frampton singing, it was, really great keyboard solos by, I think the guy's name was Bob Mayo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was kind of a big jam kind of thing, which I remember hearing that album played at night on a radio station. They were saying, here's the new, and I'm just going, oh, this is great. I went and bought it the next day, I'm sure, so, and then I saw Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Works tour before it folded up. I think it just kind of collapsed in the middle of the tour, but they made it to Cincinnati. And, that was with 40, 50 musicians on stage. So that was amazing to hear that whole production.
Yeah.
So all those were big influences on me.
How about some of your contemporaries and some of your fellow students? How was the exchange there? Did you learn from each other a lot? Or because I know you got some into more like a Mexican influenced scene while at college too. How did that all happen?
Well, that just was a gig that I got, and I was happy to get it. I was playing 5 nights a week for 5 hours a night, and I made $200 a week, but my rent was $200 a month. So all of a sudden, at 22 years old, I finally have a gig, and I had kind of frittered away 4 years of school, and so now I was able to, finish school without my parents having to fork up any money. They'd have gladly done it, but I just felt good about being able to do that. I felt I'm 22. I'm supposed to be working, and I landed this one gig, which led to another gig that was only 3 nights, made a little bit less money, but I could still easily get by. And so I was doing that gig and playing in the 1 o'clock, which I wasn't really ready for. I was not ready because you'd be playing in a small group. You'd be playing in big band 4 times a week. You had trumpet lessons. I had other trumpet lessons with Don Jacoby, who was not really associated with the school, but was a legendary trumpet player that all the cats who were into becoming commercial or jazz musicians were all studying with Don Jacoby. So it was too much. I was not ready to be playing that much, But I got through it. Probably ended up doing a bad job in the 1 o'clock and on my gig, on the weekends. But I just couldn't walk away from either one,
Yeah. How did that change when you graduated?
Well, then that band kind of folded up, and we started working with. And I say we. I was working a lot with the lead alto player of the 1 o'clock band. His name's Rene Sines, phenomenal player. And then we hooked up with a Puerto Rican salsa band, and it was now 4 horns, 2 trumpets, and that was just a blast. I mean, that music was. I think they were playing a lot of salsa music in that middle band, which was more of a tropical kind of band. So I was familiar with salsa, but not having played a lot of it. So that was a great experience. That was just a blast. The basic core of the band were not really serious musicians. They were guys that could play well, who all had day jobs, But the horn section were all school guys, and we were trying to make our living out of this band. So that led to some weird dynamics, but it was a blast doing it. And then that fell apart a couple of years after doing that for a couple of years. And so at that point, now I actually had to take a day job, and that's really the only time that I've had to do that. I was working at a marketing research firm, and I wasn't thrilled about doing it, but I have to say I didn't hate it. I did it and worked my 30, 40 hours or whatever I was doing, and came home and practiced at night. And I was probably 26 at this point. I was probably 24 when I played in the 1 o'clock. So I look back on it and I kind of go like, wow, you could have been really depressed and ready to give up on this whole music thing at this point, but I didn't even consider it, I don't think. And then I got the call to go out with Delbert McClinton.
Do you know how you got on his radar?
Yeah, with a lead trumpet player named Mark Breithout, who's also on that Live from Austin album, if you've ever seen that, and most people have. Mark's the other trumpet player on that. He got, I think it was like a theater gig in Japan that was going to be quite lucrative and needed somebody quickly. I mean, I think I was going to leave in like a week to go out and do 2 weeks and going to see how it went. It was all I knew, And I was sent a cassette tape, and I don't think there were even any charts. I think I just had to learn all the stuff from that tape. And a week later, I'm on the bus from Fort Worth heading all the way out to the East Coast, and did a 2-week run and ended up doing it for 7.5 years.
Yeah, and Delbert always had great bands and great people in his bands.
Sure did.
And I know they'd all quite changed over those 7.5 years. You were part of like maybe 3 different, iterations at least. Probably.
Well, there's a lot of drummers.
And he's known for having a,
and
hard time with drummers. But,
I mean, before he found Lynn Williams, who he worked with for quite a while, it was kind of a revolving door with a few guys. But yeah, there was. I guess I kind of look at 3 kind of core bands: the band that was there when I first started, and then kind of a middle band, and then the band. I think maybe the last 4 or 5 years with Rick Kurtz and Mike Duke and Brian Owings who was kind of in and out all the time too. But that's kind of what I look at as the band that was most of the time that I was on.
Yeah. What about the horn section? Because I think they were different sizes at times, but I guess Don Wise was on it for a lot of it.
Oh my gosh, Don was on that band. I mean, he may have been on for 30 years. He was on before I was on, and it was almost 99% of the stuff was just me and Don. That's you'll see a lot of the older TV shows. And for the 2 Austin City Limits that we filmed with Delbert, we did add some other horn players, some Austin guys who came in and did a great job. And without really much being arranged, John Blondell, this great trombone player, was really good at picking out the third part, and Mark and I kind of split up the trumpet parts. And then we added Jeff Coffin, I believe, played Barry on that second one. I'm not sure who else might have been on that, if we had Blondell back on that or not. But that album's been heard by a lot of people.
Yeah, that was at a time where he didn't really do a whole lot of studio work, and I think that was the first release after maybe 4 or 5 years without a record.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then he did Never Been Rocked Enough while I was on the band, but the producers wanted to use studio guys, so we didn't get to play on that. So, but I've been on the other end of that also. And I feel for the guys that it happens to, because when you're part of the band, you're out on the road, and a record opportunity comes along, you want to be on it too, of course,
Up to that point, did you do a lot of studio work at all, or did that just kind of evolve after Delbert's gig?
Oh, a couple of isolated projects here, but then once I moved to Nashville, which was in '91, I was on the band from '88 to '95. Things started trickling in. Some of them were with Delbert. We recorded several little shorts for ESPN, which played on ESPN forever. 10, 15 years, I'll bet. I could hear myself on SportsCenter every morning, you know. And then we were the house band for the ESPY Awards the first 3 years they did that up in New York City. So that was quite an experience for a band that was basically a bar band, you know. I mean, we would play outdoor festivals and stuff too, but when you know, now all of a sudden we're playing 30-second walk-ons for, you know, mega movie stars and stuff like that, you know? But we did a good job on it. There was a couple funky moments, but overall I think it went really well considering the kind of experience that most of us had. Yeah.
So you said after 7.5 years that chapter ended for you.
Yep.
What came next?
What came next was, you know, really meeting Dennis Taylor, because the guy that Dennis was working a lot ended up being the guy that went out with Delbert.
Terry Townsend?
Terry Townsend, yeah. And so I just kind of filled a natural void there, and Dennis and I hit it off immediately and started recording with Fred James. We did several projects with Fred, which were some of the first things that I recorded in town, you know. Like I said, I'd done a few things for ESPN, and I started working with Jim Horn, who I'd met through Delbert also. And Jim Horn started getting me on projects. And pretty soon I met Jim Hoke, and Jim Hoke started getting me on recordings. But and through Jim Horn, the next thing that really came along for me after that was the Waylon Jennings band that Waylon put together in the late 90s. I think maybe 98. I think he passed away in early 2002. So I think we were working with him 98, 99, or maybe 99, 2000, 2001. And just doing about 30 shows a year, but it was such a pleasure. You felt like you were part of a family almost immediately. And, you know, Reggie Young's on guitar, Robbie Turner on steel. You know, just a lot of the legends that go back to Waylon's heyday were back out with him because their kids had grown up now, you know. And Barney and Carter Robinson, who had met, you know, back in the Waylon's heyday, and Richie Albright, you know, the drummer, you know. So you got to hear all these great Waylon stories, you know, from the people who were there. And just a total blast. And so that was a great 3 years. That was Charles Rose and Jim Horn and I that were the horn section for that.
And there was a great live record
from Ryman, yeah.
That you did with that band too.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you met Charles?
Well, I actually met Charles in Sweden, of all places. He was over there, and you've heard Charles talk about this tour a bunch. It was the Malaco All-Stars, right? And I think that was the early 90s. I'm thinking 91, 92. But I was over there with Delbert, but we kept running into these guys because we were playing all the same shows. We must have crossed paths like 3 or 4 times in the, you know, we were probably over there 3 weeks. I think they might have been over there a month. And so I just met Charles. We were watching the Ray Charles band, you know, and I think I knew Jim Williamson maybe already, and Jim was doing the Malaco thing. And that's how, and so just sitting next to Charles watching the show is actually how we first met. And then I think that was before we did this Meet the Press album down in Muscle Shoals, which was the first recording I did. And that was Charles and Dennis Taylor and I. That's a small band that was down there that was doing their own little project. And it was just a blast. And that's the first time I saw, you know, Charles arranging skills, you know, in play, because there was no charts. There wasn't anything for that. We were just kind of, you know, we were copying a few things, like we know we did Who Would the Next Fool Be? And so Charles had sitting there trying to figure out the voicings and stuff, and you know, he, bang, 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 he had it, and we're recording, you know. So that was a really fascinating thing to see, and we've been working together for over 20 years now, I'm sure. Did
the Lyle Lovett gig come out of meeting Charles, or how did you get that gig?
Yeah, that was definitely through Charles and Harvey. And I think I might have gotten even a stronger recommendation from Harvey when they were looking for a new trumpet player. Harvey and I always hit it off real well. And we got to do about first 2 or 3 weeks of this year's Lyle tour with Harvey, and then he had to go home. He's having some health issues, and that was sad to see.
Yeah. And at that point, you stayed with Lyle for a couple of years?
Yeah, I did 05 and 06 with Lyle.
And then another quite high-profile gig came your way.
Yeah, you know, it was. There's a lot of times you're presented with some really tough decisions to make in this business, and I was pretty much at that point. You know, if Jim Horn called, I was going to do it. You know, he had gotten me on a lot of stuff, and it was usually, high profile stuff. I mean, at least for me. And so this Kenny Chesney, we had recorded with Kenny, and I didn't really know him or had hardly interacted with him on those recording sessions. But then he decided he wanted to take a horn section out, and Kenny was at the height of his fame at that point. I'm not really up on country music as I should be living in this town. So the first thing that we did was the award show out in Vegas, which is which one? The ACM Awards?
ACM,
yeah, right. Yeah. So we're up there on stage, and we're going to do Another Beer in Mexico, which was his big hit at the time, and really was the song that really made him want to bring out a horn section. And so they parted these walls in front of us, and the crowd was so loud, I physically almost knocked me off the stage. I was totally unprepared for it because I just didn't know. We hadn't done any live shows with Kenny yet. This was the first thing that we had done with him in front of a crowd. And I was just amazed, that just really floored me. So I did at least parts of 4 years with Kenny Chesney. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, it's not the kind of music that I got into music to play, but, playing in front of crowds like that is just an amazing thing to see. For me, the crowds were kind of a show for me, because they were really good about lighting them up. They had backlighting, which, they all of a sudden they just shoot all these lights on the crowd, and you'd see these 20,000 or sometimes even 60,000 people at these football stadiums, just going crazy. And so that was spectacular. You just don't expect, and especially with my background, I guess at that point I would have been almost 50. So, at that point you're thinking, well, I'm probably not going to be doing big, rock star, huge acts, I'm more of an R&B kind of guy, and I was fine with that, I was fine with that. When we were with Waylon, Waylon was a huge star, but of course he was 25 years past his prime when we were playing with him, and I just was astounded by the popularity of Kenny Chesney. It was amazing to see.
Yeah, was the Kenny Chesney gig the longest or the most involved touring you did up to now when you went back out on the road with Lyle? You didn't do that many long road gigs in between, right?
Not really. And yeah, Waylon's thing was maybe 30 shows, throughout the year. So that was nice because he paid us really well, So you're making a nice nut, you might say, just from that, and you're not even really gone from town, Whereas Kenny's thing went from, spring to early September. And that was like 50 shows. But even with that, though, a large majority of it is, you're leaving out on Wednesday and Thursday night and you're back on Sunday or Monday, So you could still work in town, Monday and Tuesdays and Wednesdays, do what sessions would come in for there. So it wasn't like you were just gone. And so but I mean, as far as production, we're talking, 11 buses and 10 or 11 huge semis, it's that kind of production. And that was also just jaw dropping for me to see that all put together and taken apart, every day, and how hard those crew guys work. It's just astounding.
Yeah. So this year you went back out on the road with Lyle Lovett and the Large Band.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
After, I guess, 15 years in between or something like that.
12. Yeah.
So how was that coming back? Well, first of all, I guess the band, although it's changed a little bit, is still kind of the same core or the same, lineup.
A lot of the same guys, yeah. Some of it has changed. He kind of went away from the just singers. Most of the singers now are players, except for Francine Reed, and obviously, I can't imagine that show without Francine Reed. But so he's got some really fine instrumentalists who are also fine singers, So that aspect of it has changed a lot. Instead of having the line of singers, doing their cool kind of dance steps, that's kind of gone away.
Was it a similar experience for you, like playing side, or did that feel different than the first time around?
It felt similar, but it was quite challenging. I don't think anything can really prepare you for playing 6 nights a week like that. And when I'm saying 6 nights a week, it's a sound check every day and a rehearsal of some sorts for the horn section. Now, sometimes we got turned loose, but he might be rehearsing the rest of the band for another hour and a half, And then you get a quick little break, to go eat, and you might have another hour, and you're putting on the suit and hitting the stage, And that was just night after night after night. And I do remember that from 05 and 06. It's after a while, when you're not ever really getting a full night's sleep. It's very disorienting, after, when you started getting into your 4th and 5th week of that. Yeah, it's a tough thing. But I had a great time for the most of it out there, and I love the band. I'm playing with, Russ Kunkel on drums. I mean, it's just a musical legend, and to hear that guy play every night, and the keyboard player, Jim Cox, is absolutely amazing. The whole band is I mean, it's every solo is a home run, so you've got that to step up to. And I found it, my first 2 weeks, I was kind of going like, man, I'm scared to death to hit this stage. And I've got a lot of experience and have done a lot of stuff, but that was kind of intimidating. I think maybe back in 05 and 06, I might have been too stupid to know what I was really getting into, Now I know a little bit more, and I was going like, man, don't mess up. Because I'm the only trumpet player, and if I start cracking notes, there's no doubt who did it, So it was challenging, and but Lyle was really nice, and they paid me some really nice compliments during the course of the tour, and that's an honor because he's got big ears. I mean, he hears everything, So that was nice, and it was always great working with Charles, of course.
Yeah, and you mentioned the time put in and rehearsal and all that, and that's something to me that certainly shows. To me, that's one of the best shows to see for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's really tight, but it's so well rehearsed that it still feels spontaneous when you just watch it. Him cracking jokes, and I know that it's mostly scripted, but every player gets to shine during the show.
Yep.
And he seems to appear as a really good band leader, director, if you will. Because I just know, and seeing the show several times out there, I'm like, it's just like, it's so well, the show is so well sequenced and so well, you get a little bit of everything, both from each individual, but also because you got the full horn section, you got cello, you got steel, you got fiddle, there's nothing you can't do really with that band. It goes from jazz to Texas swing to folk songs.
Exactly.
And it's just like, it takes you on that ride. And that must be a gratifying thing for a player.
It is, and I had the neatest experience at Red Rocks because most of the time, there might be like 7 or 8 tunes between the 2 horn sets. The show starts with horns and finishes with horns. But in the middle, there's a lengthy segment, maybe 40 minutes, maybe even more, that the horns are not playing on. And usually we're like in the basement of an auditorium, hanging out in the dressing room, and you're hearing the stuff come through on the speaker that's, a total, piece of crap, and so, but at Red Rocks, they have this tunnel. I don't know if you've ever heard about this or been out there. There's a tunnel that goes up to the sound booth, which is only about 15, 16 rows back from the stage at Red Rocks. And in front of that, where the soundboard is a couple of benches where friends and family can just walk up there and sit, and so I went up there. My wife had come out, and I got to hear a large portion of that part of the show that I never really got to hear that well, and it sounded so friggin' good. I couldn't believe it. My jaw was dropping because I've been listening to the show for a month, but really had never heard these songs that well. Even at the side of the stage, you don't get that a good a sound, and John Richards is phenomenal sound man. That was a great experience.
Yeah, and you did some recording with him too back in the day.
Yes, I know that some of it ended up on the record, but a lot of it actually didn't, which was kind of because I had a nice solo on Tickle Toe that, but I think they had some sound quality issues, and some reason they ended up re-recording that, which you never like to hear about stuff that you've done being kind of left on the floor, the tape floor. But that's what happened. But they did use some of the stuff that we played on that last record. But that's the only recording I've done with Lyle. Now, we did do an audio recording at the Moody Theater in Austin during the middle of this last tour, and I don't know what is going to happen with that at all. But it was a really good show. I know it went really well, so hopefully something will happen with that.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned Dennis Taylor, who, was a friend of mine too, and we sadly lost him a few years ago.
Yes.
But he was one of your main musical partners for quite a while.
Oh yeah.
And besides the session work and some of it you mentioned earlier, he also did some instructional books, and he lured you into doing one too.
Yes,
How
he
did
did.
that come about?
Well, I imagine that Hal Leonard came back to him after he had completed. He did 3 or 4 of those books, I'll bet. And and really, all I had to do is take his format for the tenor saxophone book that he had done already, and I had to write a lot of solos. Obviously, you can't ask a trumpet player to play tenor sax solos, but I had to come up with original solos. I had to change a lot of the drills because saxophone drills would just be impossible for anybody but Doc Severinsen to play. And these books, I think, were geared more to advanced high school players, maybe even college players. But I couldn't just, so I had to rewrite those. But I mean, it really seemed like it wasn't going to be that big a deal. Well, it was a big deal. It was, and if they hadn't put a deadline in front of me, I don't know if I'd have ever got it done. It was really quite a lot of work, and not the least of which was going through the whole book and making sure that every time it said saxophone, you had to change it to trumpet. And so a lot of proofreading and a lot of rewriting and just finding the stuff. Okay, this is not going to work for trumpet. I've got to rewrite this. But I'm proud of that book, and I still get a small check every year. It gets smaller every year.
Is that the only time you ever did an educational project, or did you do some other stuff too, or teaching even?
I taught, actually, just because of Dennis's death, I taught at W.O. Smith School for maybe 2 or 3 years at the most. And I have to say, I'm not a really good teacher, and I just, in the end, and the kids are, they have so much to do with just schoolwork, and I didn't feel like I wasn't a great practicer in high school, but I did practice. I practiced a lot, and the idea that these kids really didn't have an hour to spare. If they could just put in an hour, but they don't, and I wasn't the kind of person to either get on them in an angry way or motivate them in a way to, you're either fascinated by playing an instrument or you're not, and I didn't feel like I was the person to really try and inspire them to do that. So I gave up on that. And most of my teaching experiences have kind of ended like that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that early on, one of your influences was Miles Davis.
Definitely.
And you're now doing a gig that is basically Miles Davis tribute.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit how that gig came about, and maybe also what's your approach of emulating versus being, your own in that Miles Davis context?
That's a good question, because this group, which is Brian Zach's group, he's the drummer, and he apparently did the same kind of thing out in Las Vegas when he lived out there. And I'm not sure, it may have been through Brian Cornish, who I may have met, on one of the big band things in town or something like that. But somehow he got a recommendation so I started working with them. I think we might have been doing this 2 or 3 years now. So yeah, I mean, when I say that Miles was such a big influence on me, I never wanted to sound like Miles Davis. That was so obvious. The guy that I really copped my sound and feel off of was Lee Morgan. Really, I listened to everybody. I listened to Freddie. I listened to Clifford Brown. Anybody, Dizzy, and sax players. I stole a lot of stuff from sax players, because then it wouldn't sound like you were just ripping off a trumpet player. So I didn't. didn't really want to sound like Miles, but when this project came across, I thought, man, and I started looking at the tunes that we were going to be tackling, which were, this is the stuff that, to me, if you're going to be on a desert island with 20 albums, at least 10 or 12 of them are going to be Miles Davis albums for me, just because of the musicianship, the fabulous players that played in his groups from, we're covering from the 50s to about 67. So the last quintet is the Wayne Shorter Quintet. Yeah. So that's taken us all the way up from, 7 Steps to Heaven, Someday My Prince Will Come, and then the next tune we'll be playing is ESP, or Prince of Darkness, or so we're covering a great spectrum of music, and it's just an honor to be the guy that's out there. So we're doing our own solos. We're copying the arrangements as close as we possibly can. There might be a few things that, for various reasons, we're not doing exactly like the records. But once people start soloing, they're their own voice, So I don't try and, replicate any of Miles' solos at all. But it's kind of hard not to play some of those idiosyncratic things that Miles did, when you're in the middle of this whole show. So I'm sure every now and then I'm throwing a little thing out there that's probably pretty close to something that Miles played, but I'm trying to just play, And for the majority of music, I'm not a avant-garde player by any means. I'm a change, 50s, 60s bebop kind of player, and so that fits me perfectly.
So, did it take you a lot of time to prepare for that gig, or are you trying just to kind of, I'm not winging it in the best, but kind of keep that freshness? Because in a way, to me, listening to Miles, the last thing it should is sound rehearsed, because he's such a inspirational type of guy. Yeah,
a lot of his stuff was, the guys saw that tune that day, and they were recording it that day, and I think that's awesome. We usually do a rehearsal before every show, but we only get to play about once a month. So we really, it's one thing if you're, playing 3 or 4 nights a week. Obviously, we wouldn't be rehearsing, at all. We'd have it, we might talk about changing this and that, if we were actually, but so, to keep everything fresh, and there's plenty of holes to fall in. There's some tricky, Dear Old Stockholm has been the one that has been hardest for us to get together as a group. It's a really odd form tune. I listened to it as a kid, it was on one of the, my brother got me a Miles Davis album, and Dear Old Stockholm was on that. And that's probably the tune that is form-wise, we were struggling the most with, but we're going to get it.
Yeah. So, another influence and something we talked about in the beginning is you playing with, salsa, Mexican type of lineups. Do you get to go there still occasionally? Do you have any gigs where you can kind of let loose that way?
Not really. I mean, there's occasional tunes that are Latin based, and I'll be asked to blow a solo on, and that I can jump back and put that hat on in a second. What I actually do a lot of is sort of mariachi trumpet. A lot of people write songs either about Texas or tequila or Mexico, and all of a sudden they go like, we need some mariachi trumpet in the fills here, and I've done a lot of that over the years.
But mainly studio.
Yeah, studio stuff. Yeah, overdubbing. Yeah.
So you've done a lot of studio work,
mm-hmm.
and I'm sure there are a few sessions that, for whatever reason, stand out. I know one happened fairly recently, early this year.
I don't know what you could
I
be
don't
referencing.
Know, but somebody told me he had a pretty popular band in the 60s.
Yeah, he was with this band called the Beatles. Yeah, Paul McCartney, and that was an amazing day. That was a Muscle Shoals thing with Charles again, sort of the Muscle Shoals on steroids. We brought in Tom Malone from New York, and we added Jim Hoke, who's a phenomenal musician, multi-instrumentalist, and unfortunately he got to play some bass harmonica on a tune for Paul. And I'll remember this. I mean, Paul was like standing right in front of him, you know, like 2 feet away from him as he's playing this. But that did not make the album, unfortunately. But yeah, we had a nice, huge horn section. I think we did 6 songs in the afternoon, and 3 of them made the record. So, you know, that's obviously a big feather in anyone's cap.
Yeah, so how was that? Because I remember you telling me the story, Charles telling me the story, and actually Doug on my podcast too, but he ended up playing you horn.
Yeah. he none of us knew this, that he had actually played trumpet as a kid. I don't think any of us knew this. I certainly didn't know it. And he had made a joke at some point during the session just about, you know, playing the Saints, you know, or just as a joke. Why don't you guys just launch into playing the Saints at the end of the, you know, song, you know, and, you know, laughingly, you know, and so then he comes out, and I had brought, and we were talking about Paul Whiteman because I had been given a cornet by a guitar player who was on Delbert's band for a while named Chris Holzhaus. His father had played in Paul Whiteman's band. And I think Paul said that his dad used to play Paul Whiteman records for him or something like that. Well, anyway, Paul comes out, and we were, you know, either had finished a take or we're taking a break. And he just picks up my cornet and starts playing When the Saints Come Marching In. And very, very low. I mean, at the bottom of the staff kind of thing. But he remembered the fingering, and of course, everybody's jaw is just like dropping, you know, especially me. I don't think I've played that horn since. I need to probably just put it in a glass case or something. But yeah, that's quite an honor.
Yeah, maybe you can take a spit off it and clone Paul or something.
You know, you would not believe how many people have said that to me. You need to get his DNA, man. You need to get his DNA. It was like, that's some pretty good DNA.
Yeah. And it's also interesting to see, you know, that history. And I don't think that's a very common fact. I think I certainly knew that his dad was a, you know, jazz guy or, you know, orchestra type of guy.
Right.
Dance orchestra. And so that's neat to learn that. That's the story I certainly, you know, when Charles told me first, he's like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't really ask him, but I wonder if he actually still picks it up or whether he's just remembers enough, you know, that he can just pick the thing up and play a tune like that. That was really neat. And he was a great guy to work with. There was, you know, I think it's safe for me to tell this, that I slept a little bit before we flew out to L.A., but some of the guys didn't sleep at all. And these are experienced, you know, studio professionals. But the idea of working with the Beatles or a Beatle, you know, was huge. I mean, nobody's worked with a Beatle except for Tom Malone. I'm sure Tom slept fine. You know, after doing 1,000 Letterman shows, I don't think there's too much that could shake Tom Malone. But so we flew out to L.A. with all our stuff, and the only reason I had that cornet was because everybody was bringing every instrument that they owned. I mean, Tom Malone probably brought 12 different instruments because he plays everything, and Jim Hoke had brought several instruments, and we had, you know, clarinets, we had flutes, we had everything you could have. So I felt like, well, I'm at least going to have a cornet in case, you know, we get into some kind of funky Beatle-y kind of horn thing. You know, you never know. And I'm sure Tom had his piccolo trumpet, and so we were covered for everything. And so, you know, we did have the next night, and I think, you know, that's part of the deal. You know, is all my stuff going to arrive, you know, with me? Is it all still going to be playable with me? You know, so I think everybody got a better night's sleep the night before the actual session. But the night before we went to L.A., there was a lot of nervousness going on. But as soon as Paul walked in the room, everybody was put at ease. I mean, he was just like a regular guy, and the thing couldn't have gone better.
Yeah. And you're on that first single too. I mean, it's a song
Yeah.
that actually is being heard too,
Yeah.
which I think is a cool thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I bet it's, you know, probably hard to top that experience as far as the, you know, star power that kind of goes with it. But are there any other sessions that for one reason or another stick out if you think back?
Well, it was Jim Hoke and I played on Michael McDonald's wife's recording, And I don't know if that's even been released, but at some point they said, "Hey, would you guys want some coffee or something?" And so yeah, I'll have some coffee, you know. And so into the booth where we're recording walks Michael McDonald carrying 2 cups of coffee. You know, I wish, I wouldn't ever do this, but I kind of wish somehow I'd been able to take a picture of Michael McDonald bringing me coffee. I think that would have been pretty cool. And I've done so many recordings, but the sad thing is, they tend to drop out of your mind rather quickly because it's usually only a part of a day. Pretty rare that we're doing anything for 3 days. But if something pops into mind, you were also asking about some earlier memories, and of course, the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show were some of my earliest, and those albums. My brothers and some neighborhood friends, their fathers had built us, guitars, out of plywood, and drum set out of buckets and stuff, and we would put on the Beatles records, and we would, be the Beatles. That's about as early a musical memory as I have, and so all this time later to work with Paul McCartney is really something.
Yeah, and as far as session, also, you guys a lot of the time not even get to meet the artist, or certainly not there when the tracking happens, which means, almost the session itself is somewhat of a different experience for you guys because it's more about me coming in, me playing the part, me going home, rather than the Paul McCartney experience where it was actually that extent. For example, like, let's say you played on some of those recent Buddy Guy releases.
Right.
But you might have never met Buddy Guy.
Have not yet. I want that to change. Buddy, if you're out there listening, get the Muscle Shoals Horns out on your show. I would love to do that. I've seen him live. I'm trying to think. I'm leaving some stuff out there that I'm sure, because I'd say it's about 50-50 that the artist is there. About half the time they're not. And obviously they got things to do, and the horns are usually something that's sort of the last thing put on a record. Maybe background vocals might even come in after us, but a lot of times I think we might be some of the last. Maybe some percussion gets put on after us. I don't know. And then obviously they go into the mixing stage and all that. But so yeah, I've gotten to work with a lot of great people and do a lot of great sessions, and I've been very fortunate because I don't know if I really got into this, but when I got on Delbert McClinton's band, I didn't know jack about R&B. They don't teach you anything about that in music school, and so I had some street experience playing with the Mexican bands and stuff, which helped me, because there was no music on that gig. It was learn the show, from the tape, and be prepared to play these songs that weren't in the show every night, but he could call them at any second. So all that had to be in your head, But as far as knowing about the whole genre of R&B and where Delbert had really come from, I was totally ignorant. I was out there just doing the best I could, sink or swim. But I met some great guys out there, and they helped get me through it, and I learned a ton in 7.5 years. We were doing 200 shows a year when I started with him in '88.
Yeah. So we met about 6 years ago, I think. We did, started with that session at Kevin McHenry's studio.
Yeah. Now, see, that was 3 days of recording, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was, we did, I don't know, but I think Charles and I we did like 27 tunes over.
That's right.
That, around that time anyway. So anyway.
And that's doubled. Right? If Charles is doing it, it was doubled. So it
was all doubled. Yeah. There were some solos. So,
so that's
you
54
got to
passes.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
But talking about R&B and a gig, I kind of got, and we both had the opportunity to do together a lot, Muscle Shoals All-Stars gigs.
Those were great experiences.
Which we got to go to Italy, Lincoln Center, Alabama Music Hall of Fame shows.
Yep.
Not that many, but they always seem to be kind of certainly special to me. My question though is, in that particular scenario, you get to obviously play as a member of the Muscle Shoals Horns, but then also with some of the guys who actually made those records.
Yeah.
And Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section members. How did you experience, or have you been experiencing that particular gig?
Oh, I love it, and again, you end up feeling almost like family, you know. And obviously, I go back recording in Muscle Shoals 20 years, but I'm not on any of those, you know, classic recordings. But I'm on the stuff that's been done, you know, a lot of the stuff that's been done over the last 20 years, and done a lot of recording with Charles and a lot of work with Charles, and I think in a large part a lot of that came about because of the documentary. Don't you feel it seemed like it brought a lot of renewed interest
sure
back.
Gave us the wings it took to get to some of those more high profile
Exactly. Yeah.
gigs.
And so, you know, it's one thing to show up down there, like, and I've done a bunch of shows at the convention center down there at Florence, but, you know, we drive down that morning, we rehearse, you know, we play. But, you know, when you get to travel around and or you're over in Italy, you know, with those guys for 4 days, you really get to know more about them, and that was cool. I mean, our hangs with Will McFarland after those shows in Pareto were just amazing. There was 8 or 10 of us sitting around at the table just trading stories. Of course, Will's telling 9 out of 10, but but I could listen to Will tell his stories all night long, and we did, yeah.
Yeah. I had Will on my podcast.
That had to have been good.
Well, in the hour that we had available, we made it till 1982. So I'll have to have him back to tell the rest.
Yeah,
of the
you
story.
could do like 10 of those with him.
Yeah, and it's never a dull moment with Will. That's for sure.
No, love him to death.
So we're here getting towards the end here, and well, thank you so much for you taking this time and talking so extensively about your career. If a club owner or somebody would say, "Hey, Steve, I want you to put a band together for a gig," and you kind of, you know, had free reign of what that would be. If you're just, you know, shooting from your hip now, how would something like that look like if you were in charge?
Well, you know, I not being a singer and not being a lyricist, it would be an instrumental group, and sort of maybe like, you know, your instrumental group, you know, stuff like that. I love that funky Lee Morgan-ish kind of stuff. It would probably have some of that in there. But yeah, it's sort of a jazz blues kind of instrumental group, probably trumpet and tenor, you know, just for the economic, you know, aspect, you know, trying to, you know, even a quintet is hard to book, you know. And probably reason I should have stayed with the piano. I could be doing trio gigs, you know?
Or solo gigs.
Or solo gigs, yeah, exactly. But unfortunately, as a trumpet player, you're usually at least the 5th guy in, and so yeah, it would probably look like that. And it's very tough to do a quartet thing on trumpet, but playing the whole melody of a tune, launching right into a solo. You know, you'll have the piano solo, maybe a bass solo off, and then you're back playing the head again. You do that for very long, you're getting tired, you know, so you don't see a whole lot of trumpet quartets, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's where you are at the tenor.
Yeah. that's a hard thing to pull off, and I have done it, you know, but really it's nice to have that tenor, extra voice. And if nothing else, for just a musical variety too, you know, another voice, another sound, you know, and you get at least a 2-part harmony in your melodies, you know.
Yeah. So you mentioned that band, we call it Funky Chester, which is actually derived from a tune you wrote.
Yeah.
And it's like you and Doug Moffat, Charles Rose, Lynn Williams, Paul Osola. And we haven't been doing that many things, but I hope we can do some more in the future. And so Funky Chester is one of your songs. We've been recording another one. How, you know, you said you're not a lyricist and you're not a singer, but you've written some instrumentals over the years.
Sure, yeah.
How is that something you kind of appreciate and like doing? Is it something you do often, or is something just kind of whenever the opportunity knocks?
You know, unfortunately, I need the opportunity to present itself, and then I can write for that opportunity. Me just sitting around the house, I'm going to write a tune. You know, it's never going to happen. I'm busy enough just staying on top of the horn and, you know, taking care of the house and the dogs and you know. But yeah, so like with Funky Chester, there was a great band in town called Grooveyard with John Cowan singing. It was me and Dennis in the horn section, and Jim Hoke, Greg Morrow on drums, Mike Brigner-Dello on bass, just Reese Winans on keyboards, if I'm leaving. Pat Buchanan on guitar. I mean, just a powerhouse of a band doing, blue-eyed soul kind of stuff. And so the people from Bose, I think, just walked into 3rd and Lindsley and heard a show and decided they wanted to record us. I don't think it was 2 days before the recording session, they said, we'd like one instrumental. And so I sat at the piano, and the thing just wrote itself in less than an hour. I pretty much think it was done. And it ended up being put in Bose kiosks all around the country. As you go into these kiosks and demonstrate their surround sound thing, I think is what it was. And they even flew us up to Boston. We played for the company up there, did a little gig up there. It was me and Jim Horn and Dennis did that, yeah. So that was, that's the kind of thing that can present just out of nowhere or something. But I sort of need that thing to present itself. Like I was asked by Matt Endahl to be like a guest artist at the Jazz Cave, for a Sunday jam. And, he said, well, we'd like you to do as many originals as you can. Well, really, of the ones that I would want to present in public, I've got like 4 or 5, good instrumentals that I feel comfortable playing anywhere. But I had one tune that has kind of always been sitting back there, at least for 15 years. It was kind of a very Joe Beamish kind of bossa tune. And because this thing was coming up, I finally pulled that thing out and finished it, and I was really proud of the way it came out. It came out really good. And and the title of that tune is To Be Determined, because I didn't really have a name for the song yet. And then I started thinking about it. Well, to be determined could mean like we'll determine what the name of the song later, or it could be, okay, it took me 15 years to write this song, but I was determined and I finished it.
Yeah.
So that's the name of the song. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good question there too. How do you title an instrumental? Sometimes I guess you may start with a title and then you kind of try to evoke that on the instrument.
Yeah, I think for me, coming out of the Blue Note kind of jazz background that I came out of, a lot of those tunes were just something funny, or maybe an inside joke amongst the band, or might even be a little bit blue, like Funky Chester was named after my dog, English Springer Spaniel Chester. And like I said, I wrote it, and 2 days later we were recording, so I didn't really have time to give it some deep thought. I said, well, it's kind of a funky tune. I could see my dog Chester wearing sunglasses and, and walking down the street, to this hip kind of groove tune. And so that's where that name came from. I'm trying to think of...
I recently stumbled upon a Kelly Cox record, and you got an...
Yeah, and that was another one that sat around for quite a while until Kelly put that band together, and then I finished that. And I ended up calling it Winter's Solace, as opposed to Winter's Solstice, because it was a period of time when I first wrote that song. I must have been right after Delbert's gig, and there was kind of a time there where, I didn't really know a lot of people in Nashville. I started working with Dennis, but gigs were few and far between, and after 7.5 years of a steady paycheck, steady work, here I am in Nashville, and I don't know a lot of people. So I think that the solace was writing that song, for me to kind of go like, wow, where am I going now? It's kind of a scary place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you thought about making a record and maybe collecting some of those?
Yes, and we have talked about it, and I think I need a few more songs and a little more downtime, because there hasn't been much for various reasons. Just being fortunate enough to be busy, and like I said, staying on top of the Trumpet and taking care of our dogs, which have had a lot of health issues, and my wife has her own full-time career, so I don't have somebody that's taking care of all this. I'm the one that's taking care of all the stuff at home. You know what I mean? So, I just and again, I just what we should probably do, Andreas, is you need to just give me a deadline, and I would make the deadline.
Okay, I'll give you a deadline, and I know that Lyle Lovett is gracious enough to let the band members sell their product on the merch stand of their shows.
Yes, he would.
Which, just the entrepreneur in me tells me that it needs to be ready for the next Lyle Lovett tour.
Yeah. All right. The wheels are turning over there. I like it. Okay, yeah, because like I've said this 3 times already. I just have to have that deadline. If you give me a deadline, I'll finish it. If you just leave me to my own devices, I'm just gonna fart around at the house and work on bebop licks. Try and
We'll
see if I can add another note to my range.
We'll add some of those bebop licks into what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So, you got anything interesting coming up here soon?
Well, I'm already talking with Lyle's people about next year's tour. Those things are very hard. I mean, playing like 6 nights a week, you'll have one day off, and then you're doing a run of 5. I mean, that's a lot of trumpet playing, but it's such a prestigious gig, and the band is so awesome that I'm sure I will end up doing it, and a chance to be out there with Charles, who I've worked with for 20 years. So
yeah. So anyway,
and the band you were talking about, the Milestones, again, we're playing at Rudy's on the 20th, and then at the same time, middle of November, we have another Rudy's hit. I'm playing with the Long Players coming up. Was that the 20th?
I believe so.
Yeah, that's an Aretha
Franklin tribute.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And you've been doing those mainly with Jim Hoke, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever they have a more rhythm and blues type of project.
Yeah, they do a lot of stuff that obviously doesn't have horns, but when they do have horns, I'll get a shot at it. I know I missed a couple things with those guys when I was out with Lyle, which is the tough thing about doing a road gig. I just had a couple drinks with Jim the other day, and of course we're just talking. And I missed that. Dang, ooh, I missed that. Ooh, dang, it's like, but that's the trade-off when you get out on the road,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to thank for this past hour, also for the just great playing and friendship over those past few years.
Well,
it's
back at you. Yeah.
There's never, we said never dull moment around Will, but there's never a dull moment around horn players either, in their own crazy way, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Well, my hat's off to you because you have been a main driving force for a lot of these things that have happened. You leave it up to the musicians and you are a musician and songwriter yourself, but you're also the kind of person that can organize and herd all those cats, and get us all in the same place and make some of these things happen. And we're all very appreciative for what you have done. Because,
in many ways, the gig itself, that's the reward. The hard part is getting there, the schlepping and the rehearsing and the days on the road.
Yeah.
So
I always liken the rehearsals down at Muscle Shoals to the old Cheech and Chong Sister Mary Elephant, and Charles Rose is Sister Mary Elephant, Finally, Will's talking, everybody's talking louder, and Charles goes, "Class, shut up!" And then we'll get some things done, and everybody starts telling stories again. It's absolutely hilarious. I love it.
Yeah, sometimes hard too. You're trying to, get a lot of stuff cut in the available time. You don't really want to waste anybody's time in the studio. But then you have, Clayton or Will or somebody, and it's like sometimes hard to say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I just got to cut you off right now because you got to go back to work."
I know.
But that's part of the charm, or part of what makes it, just kind of gratifying and fun on a personal level too.
Yeah.
And
it's always been very relaxed down there, and they're not on a clock. We are both in the business of kind of turning our passion into our profession. Yeah.
And I think if that element falls by the wayside, that equation is not adding up anymore.
Right.
So,
I agree.
It's not that we get paid millions of dollars every day that will make up for the lack of that either.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, maybe Paul takes you guys on the road next time around. We never know.
Well, I think he's already already out and I think he's got a horn section from England that maybe he's worked with in the past. I'm sure. Yeah, we were crossing our fingers for that, but at the same time, it's just an honor to say that you were there.
Yeah, there's still 3 tracks out there that will come out, because everything will come out. When you're talking about an artist like Paul McCartney, eventually everything will come out. I
guess that's true. I hadn't really thought about that, but I think he's still very prolific. I think we heard he had 50 things in the can that he was going to be choosing from. So, I mean, we're kind of going like, man, it's entirely possible none of those 6 tunes will get on the record. So when we saw that 3 of them had, we weren't disappointed. We were thrilled, So that's been a big year.
Yeah. So the record is called Egypt Station.
Yes.
It just came out a couple of weeks ago. And anyways, Paul McCartney happened this year, and he kind of came out of the blue. Who knows what happens next year?
That's right. It's been that way for me my whole life. And again, starting with the Delbert McClinton gig just came totally out of nowhere, and I ended up doing it 7.5 years. And met a lot of the people who have been huge influences on me through that gig, including, I was wanting to mention this, my wife, who I met through Don Wise, the saxophone player, who we've been married 24 years now. If I hadn't started with the Delbert McClinton band and hung on to it, I'd have never met Susie. So there you go.
Yeah. So thank you so much for spending this past hour with me, and I wish you the best of luck with whatever might come your way.
Thank you. Thank you. Back at you.
This was the 41st episode of the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to check some of our earlier episodes and subscribe to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour podcast on iTunes, or look it up on YouTube, SoundCloud, TuneIn, or Stitcher. That's it for today. See you next week.